In today's Plate of History Beans, I'll give you a brief look at the city of Fort Worth in its very earliest days. In a previous Plate of History Beans, I detailed how Comanche raiding parties terrorized settlers and other native tribes throughout the 17th and 18th century. As mounted fighters, Comanche reigned supreme over a huge swath of land that encompassed all of northern and western Texas, from present-day Waco west well into New Mexico. The country around present-day Fort Worth had long been a favored hunting ground for native tribes. A treaty had been previously made with the Caddo and Tonkawa in the area in 1840 near present-day Richland Hills in Fort Worth at a place called Bird's Fort. The agreement stated that white settlers would remain on the east side of the Trinity River. Thus, Fort Worth gained its nickname as the gateway to the west. In 1841, however, it was already obvious the Texans weren't going to abide by the agreement, and a number of skirmishes took place along the Trinity River. Local tribes had many settlements of their own in the area, and occasionally conflicts came up, raiding and such. In May of 1841, General Edward Tarrant, Fort Worth is in Tarrant County, ordered a trio of American scouting parties led by John Denton, Henry Stout, and James Borland to locate native villages in the area. In the process, many native homes along the Trinity River were burned. Early in the day on May 21st, the U.S. scouting parties met little native resistance, but as they traveled west, the native settlements grew in size and native forces got organized and fought back. At some point, U.S. scouting expeditions captured a native man who revealed the location of several native towns, which became known collectively as the Village Creek settlements, thus the name Battle of Village Creeks. In truth, the skirmishes had been going on for some time before May 21st, and would continue. On the particular day in question, however, Captain John Denton was killed, and Captain Stout was wounded. Denton, the namesake of the current Texas city of Denton, was the only U.S. casualty that day. The U.S. forces withdrew, but returned a month later with 400 troops, intent on driving the native settlements out. They found the native villages abandoned, however, and white settlement continued its march westward, though raids by Comanche continued for another 25 years. When Texas joined the Union in 1845, one of the first orders of business by the U.S. government was to set up a picket line of military outposts, starting with Fort Worth in the north, running south at roughly 100-mile intervals to the border with Mexico at the Rio Grande Valley. Fort Worth was founded by Major Ripley Allen Arnold in 1849. It was named after Major General William Jenkins Worth, who commanded the Texas military forces at the time. I'll have more about Fort Worth in later plates of History Beans. Now it's time for Chapter 15 of Hunting Charm. Hunting Charm, Chapter 15, A Froward Tongue. 10 days after leaving Abilene, Doreen spent a terrifying night in the Johnsons' storage shed. She burned the lantern until the wick expired from a lack of oil. Replaying the vision of Cactus Branch running away in the moonlight filled her with such terror she cried through the night. By morning, she had convinced herself that she had been raped. At the crack of dawn, the Johnson girl arrived carrying a bowl of oatmeal. "Mama told me to bring you this. She says to tell you my papa be coming out soon to get his tools, so you should be ready." "Well, little missy, you tell your mama I get up when I please, and your father can wait." As the child dashed away, Doreen dressed. She knew Johnson couldn't be expected to wait all day, but was, nevertheless, ready to defend her right to be disagreeable. As a guest, she surely deserved some deference. After all, Johnson had failed in his responsibility for her safety. Surely the mule rancher was aware of the brutish monster living nearby. Why hadn't he provided her with greater security? With that thought, she began to cry again. The entire thing was her father's fault, and now here she was in a distant land, surrounded by colored folks who cared nothing about her. She desperately wanted to leave, but had no idea where she might go. And what if she remained? How long would it be before the disfigured man appeared again? She had never felt so helpless in her entire life. She heard the barn door open, then a moment later, a rap on her door. "Ma'am, I need to get a couple of things so I can get my chores done. Won't take but half a minute." "Go away," Doreen said. A moment of silence passed, then the mule farmer spoke again. "You okay, missus?" "Go away," she repeated. "Ma'am, I promise this won't take but half a second. I keep the traces for the mule team in there. I'll just grab those and go on quick as you please. Did you get that oatmeal my wife sent? We put a little butter and molasses in there. You come at a good time as far as food is concerned. We just bought all the—" "Would you please just shut up? I'm trying to sleep." Another long moment passed. When Cecil spoke again, his tone was clipped. "I plan to come on in now and get what I need. It won't take a second." Doreen heard a rattle as Johnson pulled the drawstring. A moment later, sunlight flooded in. "You get out right this moment," Doreen snarled. "This isn't proper. Have you no respect for a lady?" Cecil Johnson didn't speak, but instead gathered a shovel, the mule traces, and a few other tools, placing everything outside the door. During the entire process, a period of no more than 30 seconds, Doreen continued ranting. "If I were in Abilene, I would have you whipped. I don't know who you believe you are, but my father will hear of this, and you'll pay. Do you hear me? Don't ignore me. I won't be ignored. Now, you answer me. What right do you have to come in like this? Answer me. Do you hear me? Do you hear me?" "I hear you. I'm almost done." Cecil spoke firmly and without inflection. Unfortunately, the professional tone that had worked with white recruits during his time at Fort Union only seemed to infuriate Doreen more. "How dare you speak to me like that? You recall what I said to you on the trip here, don't you? About what I said I'd tell my daddy?" Cecil had tried to put aside his worries about Doreen's threats, but now that she had alluded to them a second time, he felt something akin to panic. How could he allow this foolish woman to threaten his family? Without thinking, Cecil's hand clenched around a pickaxe. He turned and raised the tool. Doreen, seeing the raised pickaxe, fell silent. Had she gone too far? For the third time since her arrival at the Johnson ranch, she felt a paralyzing wave of fear. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Cecil paused for a long moment. His threatening stance had been an instinctive response to Doreen's threats. The woman simply didn't seem to realize that her threats might destroy everything he had worked for and endanger the people he loved. Nevertheless, he lowered the pickaxe, his body quivering from adrenaline. Had he really been about to use the tool on Doreen? For a moment, Cecil realized the possibility had been there. Like a trapped animal, he had been prepared to fight. With a low moan of anguish, he fled the room. A long moment passed before Doreen scrambled from the bed and slammed the door. Since there was no lock, she decided she needed a weapon, but found only a flimsy homemade broom. She grabbed the crude whisk, clutching it to her chest, and leaped back onto the bed. She spent the next half hour sobbing, fighting her instinct to flee. Nearly an hour passed before her hysteria fully subsided. She couldn't remain in this place, she realized, but where would she go, and how would she get there? Doreen knew that an attractive woman could earn money at the oldest profession. Thanks to her own naivete in the past, the thought of selling herself for money had even inspired a degree of excitement. After all, she enjoyed sex. Why shouldn't she get paid for it? Still, there was a difference between a romantic liaison and prostituting oneself. When it came down to it, could she do it? There wasn't anything complicated about whoring, but could she stomach spending time with a string of rutting, unattractive men? The question of turning to prostitution as a way out of her predicament went round and round in her mind. It didn't take long for a few rationalizations to present themselves. First, Doreen decided she probably would have some say in who came and went when it came to the use of her own privates. After all, telling someone they had no choice in such a matter would be inhuman, and, if it came down to it, she could probably influence matters to suit her desires. After all, she had always been able to manipulate men. Why would whoring be any different? She even told herself that most men, especially the older, more dignified types, weren't really interested in the act itself, but instead were simply looking for a bit of friendly conversation. And so, with a mix of desperation and a strong dose of self-delusion, it was decided. Doreen figured she could travel to Fort Worth, Dallas, or some other place south of her current location, and once there, find work whoring. The only remaining question was how to begin her journey. She thought about that for another few minutes before admitting to herself that she would need Cecil Johnson's help. But how could she ask the mule rancher for assistance when he had seemed poised to kill her a few minutes earlier? Then Doreen came to a surprising understanding, one she might never have arrived at in less desperate times. She saw that her own behavior had provoked Johnson to raise the pickaxe. To an average person, such reasoning might seem obvious, but for Doreen, an individual habitually immune to the notion that her own actions had consequences, the thought was revelatory. Then another thought occurred to her. Doreen realized that having threatened Johnson, the man would probably be anxious to see her gone. She now dismissed the episode with the pickaxe. Johnson didn't seem like the type to kill anyone. She would simply have to apologize. Atonement, though unpleasant, would be a small price to pay if Johnson agreed to escort her south to Fort Worth. She immediately began framing an apology she would appear contrite, just as she had with her father when she wanted things at home. She would tell the mule rancher she had behaved poorly, that she had never truly intended to tell such awful lies. With her plan fully conceptualized, Doreen felt a renewed sense of confidence. She also realized how exhausted she felt. She would talk to Johnson that afternoon, but first she needed a nap. The interior of the shack felt cool, and with a deep yawn, she curled onto her side, relaxing for the first time since her arrival. The emotions of the morning and previous night drained away. Everything would be fine. As she lay there dozing, another idea occurred to her. Once she reached Fort Worth, she could send a wire to her father telling him that she had no intention of returning home. Not only would the telegram upset him, a thought she relished, but he would likely wire her money if she asked. With a satisfied yawn, Doreen closed her eyes and soon fell soundly asleep.